Hello, everyone. We have now reached the time when we're actually starting. Good morning to all of you, and welcome to the current sanctuary of the Metro East Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We're in negotiations for a new one. We'll see how that bears out. And greetings to all of you watching remotely and from the future. Howdy. This is a welcoming religious community, and we are so glad to see you here. My name is Jamie Riedessel. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm delighted to see you here today, even those of you who will merely be views in the future. Thank you. So, we welcome everyone to this home of comfort, spirit, justice, and hope. We are Unitarian Universalists. Joy. An important ritual in the Unitarian Universalist faith is the lighting of our chalice. Unitarian Universalists have many different interpretations of the flaming chalice, including the light of reason, the warmth of community, and the flame of hope. If you're watching elsewhere, please, and have a chalice or candle, please light it now as we join in saying the unison words projected on the screen.
The light is this chalice in honor of life's sacred dance of living and dying. May its flame remind us of those who have passed to us fragments of holiness. May it remind us that we too are participants in this dance.
Will you join me in a spirit of prayer or meditation? Today's opening words come from Viola Ford Fletcher, one of the last survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Today, as we face the challenges of the world, I urge you to remember that hope is not lost. Cling to it fiercely with every fiber of your being. It's easy to be consumed by darkness, to feel small in the face of adversity, but you are not small. You are powerful, strong, and capable of rising to be your best self. You can find the strength in your truth, in the light that shines within you. The world needs that light now more than ever. It needs you. Take a moment to reflect on who you are, what you believe in, and what you stand for. Hold on to hope. Stay true to yourself. And never let anyone bury your story. Your voice matters. Your story deserves to be heard. Today, I implore you to be that light, to shine brightly amid the darkness, and to never give up on that hope that lies within you. Don't let them bury our stories. Amen, and blessed be. Now I invite you to take a moment to greet someone you don't know or haven't seen in a while, and make a new connection. And then we will turn to our hymnal in 340. Great.
It's him, and then values, and then the reading. Ready. Just want to make sure who's doing what.
It is our tradition here at Metro East UU congregation to place each service within the larger values that we as Unitarian Universalists hold dear. This week, we lift up the values of transformation, pluralism, and justice. And I want to invite folks to think about this idea, again, of transformation. I think I almost choose this every time because I think it's a part of our faith that we evolve, that we look at topics and think about them, and we don't just hold the same thing, we examine. But yet, that examining comes back to the act of justice, the act of acceptance of pluralism, of everyone coming from maybe a different place or a different understanding, but there can be maybe a common ground there, that transformation can happen across these differences. And I wonder at the place that life and death are these places of transformation, these energies of grief, of the circle of life, beginning again and ending and then beginning. And that transformation holds us in this, or those polarities hold us in this circle or in this way of infinity or eternity maybe. And in that common ground, we find our breath here, again, anew, to be in the common ground together. And now Jamie will provide a reflection.
This is a reading I wrote because this is coming from personal experience. Today's topic is remembrance and gratitude, and the Transgender Day of Remembrance was this past Thursday on the 20th, where we as a trans community remember all the murders of the last year of those members of our community. This day began in 1999 with a dual observation in Boston and San Francisco, but I have a personal connection to that very first one. And one of the founders of the Day of Remembrance was a woman named Gwendolyn Ann Smith. She and I were in the same Usenet news group of the era, one of the few online places to discuss trans topics. There was probably 100 people who posted with anything close to frequency in there, maybe 30 who were regulars, a lot like this church actually, which gives you an idea just how small the internet was back in those days. Yeah, it was a very different time. But the thing is, this gives you an idea of just what everybody knew each other. And so when this was being discussed at the very beginning, it's like I was there. I saw the watch up, and while Gwendolyn probably wouldn't remember me, I was mostly a lurker in there. I was still doing all the research and learning how everything worked at that time, but that is what I needed from the community. But this sort of Day of Remembrance happened for the first time, and it kept happening and happening 26 years later. I remember as the list got longer and longer each year, not because more people got murdered, but because more people remembered that, hey, there's someone collecting this, and maybe we should tell them about it. And so we managed to remember more and more of our community that was slain for being who they are. But the thing is, I also remember when Gwen stepped down from keeping the list in the mid to late aughts because it was just too much of a grind. Hearing about murders every day and keeping the list and being the place everyone goes to, especially as it got more media attention to talk about, okay, who died and when, over and over and over again. It begins to get a little bit too much for one person to bear. I've had enough today, as we just heard. And so we have to pass it off to others, and that's what Gwendolyn did. I remember when national orgs picked up the Day of Remembrance to heighten awareness and maybe pass out a few funding appeals at the same time. I also remember a time in the mid-teens when topic of diversity in the workplace was so acceptable to talk about that even corporate statements came out in support of this. It was a stunning time to see this, but the trans community was always a little leery of the corporate statements, because when corporations do this sort of thing, they're doing it to cast their company in a certain light. And when they're expressing regret over people who have no direct attached to their business line, why are they there? And sure enough, when the cultural tides turned, they all evaporated. But in 2022 and 2023, I was co-head of my big company's Pride group, which means I was in the hot seat for the Colorado Springs nightclub shooting. So I got to help deal with that. So I got asked by executives later that year what our comms plan was for the Day of Remembrance. They were aware enough to realize that this is something that we needed to do right. And so I talked with them. They knew it was a holiday, but they also knew that message had to come from us. And I explained what this holiday was, which is more of a memorial, not a holiday. Isn't the kind that would benefit from like a C-level sending a canned email voicing support for the community. This needed to come from the community, which, as I was the head of the internal group, was me. So I wrote that. and I wrote it from the heart. I didn't include a full list of murders. That stopped being viable in the early teens. And I explained what the Day of Remembrance was and how it came about and why we were treating this one community observance differently. Because the Day of Remembrance is not about defiant, in-your-face pride. It is not a cry of resistance. We march through the streets, tears streaming from our face, claiming our space in the world. We do this quiet, as a memorial. It's much like that table of Jewish holidays that has which ones are feast, which ones are fasting, which ones are happy, which ones are sad. And this is a sad one, and Americans are uniquely bad about that. Thing is, other faiths have similar sad holidays. The Lenten calendar has a couple in there, for those of you Catholics who remember that. The Jewish calendar, as I just mentioned, has a bunch of them. The Islamic calendar has a few as well. But American culture treats days off as a way to sell cheap mattresses. And this isn't the kind of place you do that for, you know. Even Memorial Day, which started off as a solemn remembrance of our dead veterans, turned into celebration of the Army and yay, free mattress, cheap mattresses. But this Day of Remembrance is very much a secular event, not tied with any faith framework. We remember our dead. Like, I stand in gratitude and remembrance for the dead, whose lives taught us the light of personal discovery, and life joyfully lived, but were ended by the actions of others. We will work for a future when such deaths don't happen, so discovery and joy can increase. Love is at the center. On that happy note, it's time for Weekly Joys and Sorrows. So, home for us means a place where we can each share the things that weigh us down and lift us up, which we need today, and share for those of us who love us, surround us, and in good times and in turmoil. If you'd like to recognize a joy, sorrow, or milestone, please circle around kind of this way, pick up a rock, put it in, move on, and then sit down. If you're not able to stand up by yourself, raise a hand. We will take a rock for you and place it because we are loving people. Let us be in a spirit of prayer and meditation.
Nope. Okay. Now is a time for all ages. So for those who are young or young at heart and young at knees, join me on the ground over here. Yes. Okay. So this morning we're going to read a little bit of this story about what is land back. And part of the story starts out with the protest movement started in 2020. That was only 5 years ago. How old is everyone? Was everyone here 5 years ago? No. Some of us were, some of us weren't. And it is when Indigenous folks who were forced out of their land and their place of their ancestors, decided to stand up and speak for the injustices of the ecological, so that's like the land and the relationship that we have to the land and what was happening now. And the Indigenous folks have always seen the land as a sacred place, or a place that is very special in the ways that we consider it or the ways that we care for it, and see it as part of, and that we are invited to see it as part of our own self, our own family almost. And so they remember a history because, does everyone remember that there was a Mayflower, there was a boat that happened, there was people who came into this land who had skin similar to mine, and they forced out a lot of folks who were here. And they also died. A lot of those people died as well, being forced away from their place of home, their place of family. And so in that memory, there has been this movement to say, hey, we actually want that land to come back to us. We want those memories, we want that space. And so these folks have organized, and some have gotten their land back. So some of these success stories include the Mashpee Wampanoag in Massachusetts. The Wampanoag people are those who first met the Pilgrims who sailed on the Mayflower in 1620. Another newsworthy success was the return of the Californian island to the Wyatt people. And these movements, it's still happening. And the ways that they're working towards getting that land back into their family is they want to see it as a way of abundance, of this has been a path of scarcity, of not having enough places to take up space, but they want to say this is about abundance. This is about returning back to a different way of life. So with that, we can sing out our parents. Okay, now is our hymn 336, All My Memories of Love. So when considering how to marry these principles, these ideas of grief and hope and life and death and indigenous people and trans people, I thought about the idea of trust. And I was wondering, what role does trust play in your life? I wonder around the idea that maybe you trust the sun will rise. Have you ever thought about that? Like, that's a trust. Air will fill and leave your lungs this morning. Your heart will continue to beat without even thinking about it. What about in your relationships? Trusting the mail will come. The grocery store will have items on its shelves. When things happen, someone will be there for you. How does it feel to think about this trust, to think about the things that maybe you don't think about consciously, and feel it in your body? Maybe you start to notice your breath a little differently. Maybe the memory of the sunlight hitting your skin on a brisk morning. Maybe you feel constriction, witnessing how the word trust might make you feel like you're bracing for impact, remembering the failure or the breaking of trust, the times people didn't show up or weren't able to. Maybe a memory of the pandemic's empty grocery store shelves, or lost in another way. As someone who cares professionally for the wholeness of people and studied all the ways that people have fractured and then come together over history, I think a lot about the social fabric. The ways we are woven together, knitted together, into each other's lives. Even in this time of digital isolation, we are still knitted together. Today, I want to frame some of this discussion about grief and life and death in the principles of cybernetics, actually. In an interview at the Essentia Foundation, which operates in the metaphysical idealism or non-dualism, the notion that nature is essentially mental is the best, and they say that this is the best explanatory model we currently have in opposition to the materials view. Hans interviews Nora Bateson about her book, Combining, building on her father's legacy of cybernetics. And I think this frame will help us explore the relational feedback between grief and hope of the interconnected realities between Indigenous folks and trans folks today. Cybernetics, in case you were wondering, is a transdisciplinary area. It influences the idea of systems and theories and thinks about the ways that parts relate within a system or in an idea. For example, when looking at a tree, where does it end? Where is it at the roots? But what about the microbiome? What about the soil? What about the nutrients that is shared between the different species of trees that might live around? Is it one tree or is it multiple trees? What about the light that is converted into energy and chlorophyll? Is that separate from the tree, or is it a part of the tree? Is it a part of what it knows to be itself in an ecosystem, in an environment? Because when we start to parse out some of these things, it becomes harder. And this idea of a tree is also, we could also compare it to a car and a car engine. So it's about, fixing the relationship, not just the brakes or the tires, or it's seeing the ways that the car maybe navigates between its parts. And this influences idea of cybernetics influenced a lot of the ideas of AI that we see, but it also, and not but, and it influences like family systems theory. It influences, it's transdisciplinary. So, you know, when we think of the mind as one separate thing, as me as one separate entity, but then I start to realize, like, no, I have been influenced by so many friends and the way I grew up and my education and where I live and the water that comes in my tap system, right? Like all of these things that we don't think about that are interconnected. It's hard to see one person as an individual. This idea of cybernetics also gave way to this idea of schismogenesis. So schismo, you know, schism, fracturing, and genesis, creation. So it's naming the relational patterns that lead to the breaking of relationship. It's interested in where does the car stop working? Where do I see that the engine and the brake pads? How do I see this more clearly as a relationship between, rather than an isolated event? And so schismogenesis is the way of looking at what breaks a relationship. And then the last word I'll say on this frame is what is called a runaway. So when a schism happens, there eventually is this wider net of implication and effects. So maybe pesticides create a way to eat food for a community, but then it also affects the soil's microbiome. So then it's toxic to other things, right? So it's looking at, okay, there's a pattern here. There's a bigger way of seeing this. And so in this idea, I want to take a look at the schismogenesis, or the root of schism in creation, as it traces its pattern of what we no longer are trained to see and perceive. So it's like a muscle that's been atrophied. And when we look at when indigenous people had a relationship with the land, had a family with the land, to see itself a people, a part of the land. Even that sentence, a part. Is it a part or is it a part, right? So it's anyways, now I'm thinking about all the ways that our language really forms the way that we think. And, you know, English speaking, English is my first language, so that's what I know. And, you know, when indigenous people who had a relationship with what we English speakers call land or property, a commodity, the indigenous folks said, this is like this doesn't make sense. Like, it makes no sense for colonizers to buy a land from a native people. It's like, no, you can have some of the resources, but we will also have some of the resources. And this culture, this different culture, and this different way of relating to land and private property is created the schism, or not, it didn't create it, but it is part of what is still schisming out today in this country. It is the way of naming a runaway of this. Is we still have private property. We still have indigenous folks who do not have access to their land and the people that stewarded it. So, and it's cultural, but it's also a spiritual nature, because, you know, the pilgrims came to understand themselves as to establish a land for God or for their God, and it was in direct competition and annihilated the way that God and Creator, as a way of relating to creation, for the indigenous folks could practice. So is this, a land of religious freedom, is a question I have. But the Pilgrims started to build walls. They're an agrarian culture, so they, build their own gardens but walls around it. And that was a foreign thing because for indigenous folks, there was this way of traveling, this way of trusting that food will be there or it won't be, and you tend to it because it is the land, it is your family. And I wonder about this image of what if the colonizers assimilated to the indigenous way of life, to understanding that two-spirit folks had a way in this culture and this society beyond the binary of man and woman. And I wonder what our life would look like as trans folks who would benefit from that understanding and that knowing now. Because, these two issues, indigenous and trans folks, it might seem like two separate parts, but, they interlock like two parts of an engine in a car. They speak to each other. And this idea of whiteness is a new phenomenon in the last 100 years or so. Gender binary is a relatively new concept. Like, I come from Irish folks, and they wouldn't have been considered white until about 100 years ago. So Alok Vadmenon is a non-binary poet, educator, and activist, and talks about the invention and teaches about the invention of the sex binary in the West, and shares about how historian Dr. Lequer reflects that the differences that make a difference are historically determined, and writes about how the West transitioned from a unisex model to a binary model in the late 18th and early 19th century. They're very recent. It's not too long ago. Previously, males and females were viewed as different forms of the same sex, right? There was more of a common ground there, more of maybe an indigenous way of thinking. And sex nonconformity was understood as having either too much heat or too little cold. So it was pre-Enlightenment, and bodies weren't as important as the dualistic properties of the universe. So seeing oneself as a part of the way of these different principles in opposition to each other. And post-Enlightenment male scientists utilize the same methods like phrenology to prove that males and females were anatomically opposite, and that they used it to establish biological differences between races. So this gender binary was very caught up in the racial aspects of this and eugenics. And differences that had not been considered relevant or important for centuries were now foundational to categorization. Dr. Lequer argues that it wasn't advancements in science that led to the creation of the sex binary model, it was politics. The new sex binary permitted men to justify women's rights on the basis of nature, or lack thereof, of rights. So both the unisex and binary sex models were developed by men to position men as superior, trying to define sex outside the category of politics and root it in a natural or nature way of thinking for white male scientists to naturalize inequality. And it's interesting. It's almost like this loop between the natural of knowing oneself within creation or within the land, and then it returns back, but in a way that is fractured from itself, fractured from the powers that be within each human. And when we look at non-dualism, there is a link between white supremacy and defining both gender and religious aspects of indigenous belief of self, creation, and creator. So, so we see, and so I think this is an invitation too, of like, there's more to speak about this, but an invitation into seeing ourselves as a part of an ecosystem and not as distinctive, and actually challenging that in a daily or spiritual practice or whatever helps us to kind of reintegrate as a ecology, as a human family. So, and that pushes back against the light into the aspects of schismogenesis. So when we think about the history, the Thanksgiving tale, it started with actually a suffragette, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, gave a talk in 1893 about how the Pilgrims and the Native peoples had Christmas together. After the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, she spoke about how the foremothers planned and hosted this meal together. She invented this story to point to the authority of women as actors in making this nation. So, right, it's in this runaway system, there's this way of white feminists trying to gain power again, right? Trying to say, no, there's equality here. Trying to fight back against these scientists who said, no, you're supposed to be in the kitchen, or your anatomy is natural like that. And it wasn't true, this idea about the Pilgrims and having Christmas. They didn't actually, part of their religious beliefs were not observing Christmas. It was just a normal day because that was a part of their practice. But the story stuck, and it led to the creation of Thanksgiving. She was trying to untangle the patriarchy and build a lie at the expense of another relationship. So we see that relationality and that way of being affects these broken trusts, these walls, don't actually allow us to have relationship with one another. And that relationship with the Native people who had a different story. We still call the Cahokia Mounds after the Kazkia people, not who built the mounds, but for the tribe that the French encountered in the 17th century, who had no relation to the folks who actually built those mounds thousands of years ago. This is a part of the atrophy. The epicenter of the Western wisdom misses that it doesn't question the guy who first met the people at a certain place, right? Because this idea of property created this idea that those folks who were here now must have been those who were here earlier. And that's a cultural understanding. That doesn't make sense. So actually, we are on the land of the now what is called the Peoria tribe of Indians of Oklahoma. Is a confederation of the Kaskaskia, the Peoria, the Pinkashaw, and the Wee Indians united as a single tribe in 1854. So in this way, we can honor what it actually is to be in relationship with those who know this land, and to restore that trust, and to start to talk about the ways that trust was broken. So when trust is broken, there's this need to repair. In 1970, Massachusetts officials were planning to celebrate the 350th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower, and invited Wamsuta Frank James of the Wampanoag people to share his reflections. And instead of speaking at their event, because he wrote, actually, this is a day of mourning for my people. This actually marks the time that we lost our connection to our land. And so they did not like what he had prepared to speak. And so instead he went to the place that the pilgrims came and started the first day of National Day of Mourning. And in this way, it was able to formalize and to name the grief of what had happened, to name the relationship that was broken. And this is also, and for Trans Day of Remembrance, it's a day of observance. It's a day to remember what was lost, who could not have become who they were in the ways that they needed to, maybe, who did become who they felt they needed to be and were killed for it. As a clergy person, MTUG had us come this past Thursday to, they had a vandalism that happened at the Memorial Garden. And so they wanted clergy there to basically process around those who were observing, who were walking from the headquarters to the garden. And so I was in my vestments with other clergy folks and my UU colleagues, and as well as many others. And we walked, we had whistles, we had walkie-talkies, and we made sure that we were on the outside to hold that mourning, to hold the grief that vandalism still happens, that things are not safe yet, but to know that they are not alone. And that we are not alone, that I am not alone, right, as a part of that. And that is a way to restore these broken chains. So, in New Age words, this could be seen as a raising of consciousness, or it could also be a way of integration, of saying, hey, this energy that used to flow as a circle has been broken. How can we release some of that energy to come back into the circle of life, into the circle of humanity? How do we repair? I mean, that's the root of reparations. Reparations means land back. It means honoring the sanctity of gender expansive people. But it also acknowledges that we are all bonded together in ways that we don't even realize, maybe. So with that, I want you to remember that there's hope, that there is things happening, that we are not without means and agency, because we are hopeful people, ultimately. May that be true. Join me in our final hymn, 322, Thanks Be for These.
Thanks be Time for stewardship. All right. There it is. Found my copy, that's all. Amy, if you'd be so kind as to help pass the plate. All right. As Amy passes around the basket, I offer you a gentle reminder that this community of faith is supported only by your giving, and we're a little short right now. Stewardship is more than financial donations. It is also about sharing your time, sharing your talents. So please consider asking a board member if you have something to contribute. And also, if you're paying cash, we do have envelopes in there so you can write down who you are so you know who to attribute things to, which matters for things like voting and membership. And finally, if you're willing to talk to us about volunteering opportunities, serving on a committee, we hope to have a few more announcements soon. Again, please talk to people on the board. Those of you on the board, please raise your hand. Like, I think there's only 2 of us at the moment. Hey, more. Hi, people. Yay. It's all of that. All right. Okay. May this offering equip us to inspire love and seek justice. All right. Yes, now we have some announcements. So the first one is we don't have to break down today, which is really the important thing. That is very much a thing we need to do. And there it is. And also, next week we're seeing Sayer Johnson. I believe Amy will be worship associating that one, so we'll be talking about various things. And next slide. Also, if you'd like to receive the weekly flyer or gives you any idea as to what we're doing, when we're doing it, who's talking about it, please talk to us about that. There's a visitor card out front, and we'll pass it in. We'll give you something. Similar if you'd like to fill out a name card. Name tag here, one of those things. I think all of you have them, so this is more for those of you online. Hi. So yes, next slide. Also, the Oasis Women's Center in Alton, whom we've supported for many years, is asking for our support again for this Christmas season and providing gift cards for mothers and children associated with Oasis. More details forthcoming. We'll let you know when you know them. And we'll also be conducting a food drive to help replenish the Glen Ed Food Pantry. While SNAP benefits are mostly there, they're currently very depleted right now, and we need to get them stocked back up for our neighbors. And we're going to be bringing items to church for the next few Sundays. See the newsletter. You can sign up for that to hear the details, to figure out when we need them and where to bring them. You can also donate them directly to Glen Ed. They'd appreciate that too. They'd like money.
Money's good.
Money's good. All right, and now join me in singing our extinguishing. Talking thing here. The light true meaning cannot be put out. We are the keepers of this flame until we meet again.
So as we go today, may we know that we are not just a tree or just one thing. We are part of all that is. May we witness it and know it more and more each day. May it be so, and blessed be. Okay, worship associates, we're going to meet in here after. Also, if you are looking to be a member or want or interested, please see a board member to sign the book after in the back. So, or see me. Great.